It is 5:30, so I will call the meeting to order. Should we bump up Deputy Fisher? Unless you guys want to learn about private infrastructure, and that's totally up to you.
They totally do.
Yeah, I know. Well, welcome. We'll go around the table for your benefit. My name is Courtney Johnson. I'm the mayor of Carver. Go ahead,
Oh, Eric Hirschman, I'm a new council member.
Christy Monk, I'm a council member.
Lori Sayer, council member.
Dave Anderson, the city attorney.
There we go.
Joey, the town cop.
I'm Erin Smith, the community development director.
You see
Brent,
it?
the city manager.
Oh, I figured he would do that.
Yeah.
so
Oh,
much.
okay.
I'm Lynn Sheedy, I'm the finance director.
Brenda Good, Deputy Clerk.
Chad Shell, Public Services Director.
Kelly Trudeau, fire chief.
Aaron Schmidt, Assistant City Engineer.
And sometimes we let them sit at the table.
Yeah, if I'm one of them.
Well, welcome. Did anybody tell you about Two Truths and a Lie?
Yes.
Oh, good. Are you prepared and willing?
Sure, why
Okay.
not?
So just the background is we have made everybody do this. Eric had to do it, the superintendent was agreed to do it, not made to do it, but our state senators have done it. I truly like to get to know folks, so I think it's just a fun way of learning more about you. So if you're willing, feel free to give an introduction, jump right into Two Truths and a Lie. Your choice.
My name is Stephen Fisher. Just finished up my first year here with the Carver County Sheriff's Office. Probably jump right into the Two Truths and a Lie.
All right.
I was a college wrestler. I have 2 sons, and I'm fluent in Spanish.
Okay, so we're gonna raise our fingers for which one we think is the lie.
Where'd you wrestle at?
Oh, hey, stop cheating. Take off his hat. Can you take off your hat? Can we see your ears?
I do not have California.
But he knows.
Yeah. All right. Nobody thinks you speak Spanish.
It's 3. Yeah.
Okay.
I was waiting to say something in Spanish.
Well, welcome. You're the evening deputy, so you're here Tuesday through.
Yep. This week will be Tuesday through Friday, then the following one's Wednesday through Saturday.
All right. Well, welcome.
And where did you wrestle? For children?
UW Eau Claire.
Oh, lacrosse.
Oh.
Are you gonna fight?
Yeah, they'll wrestle.
We're gonna play wrestling. I'm kidding. My husband was a wrestler.
So well, on that note, welcome. I think you're gonna keep busy the next couple of nights. So
Yeah.
appreciate you. Stay safe. You're completely welcome to stay and learn about private infrastructure and
Run.
permit escrows, but you can also leave it whenever you like. So, thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to
Nice to
meet
meet
you.
you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Joey. Good to
Welcome
see you
back,
guys.
Joey.
Yep.
Good to see you
Thank
later.
Have fun tonight.
We will. See ya. Okay, up next on the agenda is our private infrastructure policy. Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor and Council. So tonight, introducing a topic that we've kind of teased for several months. We started talking about this kind of a year ago, just kind of lost its place on the agenda, but now we have some time to kind of bring this back. So oftentimes through a development process, the city will end up taking on private infrastructure or not, the city won't take on, but there'll be private infrastructure installed as a part of a development. And so here you can see some examples. So like, for example, the River Bluffs neighborhood, which is just off of, gotta stop saying County Road 40, Old Carver Road. County Road 40 no longer exists, at least through Carver. But that was originally developed as a townhome association. As you can see, this Google Earth picture doesn't show any of the development there. But typically, and Aaron can get into some specifics, but in a more dense development, you might see narrower streets to preserve land, so you can get greater densities. And so typically those can be provided or put in and constructed at a more affordable cost compared to city streets. And so oftentimes you'll see city planning commissions and councils approve those being going in. For example, the streetlights in the Spring Creek neighborhood, they wanted a elevated type of streetlight. And so if you go through that neighborhood, you actually see kind of a stamp on the bottom of the streetlights, kind of embossed with kind of a blue paint that says Spring Creek. And so those identify those streetlights as privately owned and maintained by the HOA. Where this gets into a policy is oftentimes, through a variety of reasons, the city is asked to take on that private infrastructure. Sometimes it's through a lack of proper savings on reserves to maintain that. Sometimes they just don't have the resources via their HOA or whoever's maintaining that to provide the resource. And there's been maybe a handful of times where the city's been formally asked to review the taking of private infrastructure. I think the last time it got to a formal review, there's a lift station in Carver Bluffs West at the end of Overlook Drive. Excuse me, it's probably about 5 to 6 years ago. There was actually a failure at that private lift station that caused a sewer backup to 2 of the homes that were right next to it. And going through that process, it was found that the HOA wasn't maintaining that lift station properly. And so the request was, we don't work with lift stations, we don't want to deal with it. Can the city just take it over? Well, the issue at that point was like, well, it's not connected to, it doesn't have the same type of specifications, pump sizes, it's not connected to our SCADA system as any of other sanitary sewer lift stations. And ultimately, the council decided not to move forward with that. In kind of more recent times, we get, I would say, phone calls to staff, primarily myself or Aaron, asking if the city would take over private infrastructure. And anecdotally, we'll share that the city hasn't had a history of taking private infrastructure over. But what this policy does, I'd like to get away from staff kind of using past experiences as a means to say what we think the city council may do, and have the city council formalize an opinion. So with the help of the department heads and the city attorney, we drafted a model policy that says that you wouldn't consider, now you can say, like, well, that's what we want, or we like this, but with some amendments, or to say, no, we want to look at these on a case-by-case basis, and we want to review all requests to take over private infrastructure. Like, for example, Vernon Drive, it's not listed on here, but there's a section of Vernon Drive that's private. I would say maybe 10 years ago, they asked if the city plows could plow that section of Vernon Drive. And, the one thing I would say before I kind of hand it off to maybe Dave or Aaron to kind of explain some of the intricacies, if the city public work or public services department decides, hey, we'll contract to plow part of Vernon Drive, there's kind of a domino effect where you think of Sumac Circle and Lano Lane. What's the basis to say no when you say yes to one street? And so a really significant policy decision and choice for the council to make. Before I hand it off to Dave, is there anything, Aaron, that I'm missing on just kind of describing how private infrastructure works and the complexities of it?
Not that I can think of right now.
Okay. Dave, would you mind just kind of hitting the highlights of the policy and what thoughts you put behind drafting it?
Yeah, the main point that I think is worth emphasizing is that, every development is kind of looked at independently, and I know Aaron and Brent can also chime in if they disagree, but there are reasons for private infrastructure. For example, I know recently in a couple developments we allowed private roads. One was Brookview and another was Timber Creek, just because the developer, the way they designed their residential subdivisions, they either needed or wanted the flexibility to do construct streets that do not otherwise meet city standards, because the city has a very specific set of engineering standards. So you need a certain width and a certain size for your streets, and if you want to put in private streets, that's fine. Most cities are okay with that, but then you can't expect the city to maintain them long term, because the whole point in accepting a private roadway is that you build it to our standards. If you're going to build a public street, we're going to tell you how to build it. So I think the original source of why there's private infrastructure is very different depending on each individual development. And in the case of private streets specifically, if the city actually starts to plow a private street or maintain it, if that happens for a period of 6 years, by operation of statute, it actually becomes a city street. And there's no way to unring that bell. That's an exception. Most of the other infrastructure, there's not a statute that exists that actually creates, a statutory user situation like that. But, the point of this policy, as Brent alluded to, is really just to say, look, we allow for private infrastructure, and we do that for the benefit of the developer at the beginning of the development process. But that means that we have no obligation to do it. And in fact, the city doesn't plan for maintaining these different pieces of infrastructure in its long-term plan and its capital improvement plan or anything. And so to start, making exceptions to that general rule, I think it's a little bit of a slippery slope. And you're going to have to start planning for that financially if that would be the goal. And so, again, to Brent's point, it's nice to be able to point back to a council policy when people make these requests. And so the gist of the policy, and it's 2 pages long, but I think the point of it is the council is doing one thing and saying we're creating a policy that says we're not going to accept private infrastructure for public maintenance long term. And might there be reasons in the future to think about an exception to that? Well, maybe. I can't predict the future, but it's nice to draw a line in the sand and say, it gives staff the tools as well to say, no, this is what the council's decided, and in fact, we're not going to even consider it or bring it to the council. And so again, it's 2 pages long, but really I think the intent of it is to say that we're taking a position that we're not going to be taking on this infrastructure for the reasons that we're talking about here. So there's a lot of background in the policy, and we're happy to answer questions about anything. One thing I want to add too, when we draft development agreements and there's a private road, staff understands and I think appreciates the fact that if that private road fails, let's say an HOA fails and doesn't maintain that road long term, that's not only going to do a disservice to residents, but it's also going to do a disservice to the city if we need to get law enforcement in there or the fire department in there for for public safety reasons. And so there's a reason to kind of keep in our back pocket the ability to maintain those private streets. So we actually have developers sign and record against the property what's called a private road maintenance and easement agreement that gives the city the right to make repairs if they fail to, if the HOA fails to do so, and then assess all the property owners for those repairs. But again, that's kind of I would say a belt and suspenders for the city to be able to exercise a right if and when we needed to, because access is obviously really important for not only residents but law enforcement and public safety folks. So so those do exist, but they really only are meant for public or private streets. We don't record or do anything else as it relates to street lights or private parks or other things, other than to usually point out in the development agreement that it's the understanding and obligation of the HOA to maintain that long term, not the city's, just to, again, be clear about that from the outset. So,
Chad, anything to share from a public services perspective?
Not really. I think it was covered very well.
I have just one thing to add. When we're talking about private streets, it probably can sound like these private streets are narrow and too skinny, and why would we allow a developer to do that? So they're private. They usually are just typically a bit smaller than what our public streets are. I will say the fire department still does a review of the development, so they make sure that their apparatuses can fit on those private streets. So it's not like we're allowing them to go down to something that's unsafe. It just doesn't meet our engineering standard, but it does meet the fire department requirement.
Great.
Happy to answer any questions, Mary.
Questions, comments?
I have some questions.
Go
So
ahead.
would it be fair to say that all the private infrastructure now is grandfathered in? If we move forward with a policy like this?
The policy is meant to just memorialize, I think, what staff has always been doing and telling folks, no, we're not. So the policy is really meant to just say, the city is not going to fix your private infrastructure.
Okay.
So we're not gonna stop allowing it if it
Okay,
makes
there,
sense.
yeah, so you could still allow it.
Yeah,
Right. And then this, would somebody ever have private infrastructure not know it? Like, let's say I had a sidewalk and I'll be like,
Yes.
why aren't you guys plowing this? Or like, we just neglected it, I thought it was yours.
Right, so I would say like an example, like, not specific, well, that did happen on Sumac Circle way back when, the city's maps weren't updated. And so the city for at least 2 to 3 years was plowing Sumac Circle. And then, we discovered that that wasn't a city street. And so there was some heartburn of
Okay.
like, hey, you're gonna have to plow it. I would also say, looking at, if you remember, there was some consternation regarding Sumac Circle and parking. And so the folks that live on Aspen or adjacent neighborhoods were parking on Sumac Circle and were frustrated to realize that Sumac was private and that there was some parking restrictions that the city didn't have any control of. And then the HOA from Gwinnett Spring Creek, wanted the city to step in and, start ticketing these folks. We also, we don't have the ability to ticket on a private road any more than we would if someone parked in your driveway. It ends up becoming a civil issue. So it, to your point, it is usually typically a kind of a great source of not miscommunication, but mutual expectations aren't out there because there's a lot of folks that probably don't even realize they live on a private street. But we try to make some of those kind of hiding in plain sight where we change, like the street signs are in blue instead of green.
Yeah.
They won't see a city plow go down, they'll see a
If somebody,
Contractor.
if a resident lived on a private street and said to me, why doesn't the city plow? I pay taxes here.
right.
How do I respond?
Yeah, I
You
mean,
bought on a private
Mhm.
street.
Okay.
right.
You purchased a home
That
on
and
a
I,
private street.
we often respond with, you don't pay taxes for just the part of street that's in front of your home. You pay taxes for plowing the entire city street system because you drive on the entire city street system. So this, the same
Okay.
goes for parks and what have you. You're not just paying for that maintenance piece right in front of your property, but access to that whole system.
Okay, that helps.
and it's not always understood, but those streets are private and people can be trespassed from them. I mean, they're open to all the folks who live on those streets and who visit those folks who live on those streets. But that's privately owned property, and so if there is somebody, causing problems in a subdivision and going onto private streets, the HOA that owns the property could theoretically trespass people. So that's something that not everybody
I'm
understands.
gonna have to change the path where I walk my dog.
Well,
Yeah,
and-
but because of you, Lori.
Well, that's actually it's not a bad question because most of the time people are never told to leave a private street because, it's kind of understood that streets are streets and sidewalks are sidewalks and the way people drive and circulate through town, that's just inevitable that they're gonna be using potentially private streets. But in all honesty, I mean, it is private property. And we do put an easement, we put language into our agreements that give the city and its staff and its, code enforcement folks or law enforcement the right to go onto those streets whenever we need to for just city business. But private parties don't necessarily have the right to unless they're, invited by somebody who lives on the street or whatever else. So.
Christy? Or I'm sorry, Lori, you good?
Yes.
Okay, Christy.
Yeah, I like it. Mine, I just have a couple of wordsmithing. So, under number 1C, the first sentence there is a little, aggressive, inflammatory for me because it says the private infrastructure is just that, private, let's, if we can maybe try and word that a little bit better.
Christy, I'm gonna push back against that and kind of share some of my feedback. I think I've gotten a number of calls in yours, I think it was the Sumac Circle example from last summer, and folks don't know. So I think to have this be like really clear, I don't think it's unkind. I think that clear is kind, and that was pretty straightforward. I don't have an issue with really
And I still
spelling
do,
it
just
out.
saying, it's private. It's almost like, feels like the naughty finger to me, like, listen to hear what I'm telling you. I don't like it, but, and then on E, There's one here, so it says the requests are typically made because components of private infrastructure have not been appropriately or adequately maintained by those responsible. So one, do we want to say typically? I mean, often, typically, maybe we don't, maybe that one's okay. But it just felt like saying that this is typical, and when not, I feel like nothing in the world is ever really typical.
What section are you in?
This is E now, 1E.
I think you say the requests are historically made.
Or often or something. So there's something about typical that, like I said, I don't feel like most of these come in as
Or what's it?
Second sentence in E there.
typical. It says the requests are typically made.
Fourth line.
There you go, I can't watch that most anymore.
I didn't run dizzy.
I mean, generally, I mean, I think there's probably a number of synonyms
Yeah.
you could use there.
That would be fine. And then to put the infrastructure has not been appropriately or adequately maintained by those responsible. I mean, we're making some assumptions there that that's why they're asking.
Anecdotally, I mean, that's the case. I mean, they come when their infrastructure's failing because their HOA didn't take care of it. I don't know, Brent can probably support
Actually-
this, but I think the vast majority of times
Okay.
is because of that. Otherwise, they wouldn't be asking, right? If
Okay.
it was nice and pristine and
Right.
in really good shape, they wouldn't be asking.
So if we could just maybe move typically to something often or whatever it might be. Hi, Joy. So back to the C, I don't know, that sentence just doesn't seem very professional. It seems very pointed.
Are you looking for something like the definition of private infrastructure?
Something along that line. I just think that dash, like, it's just, it's right. It's a little sassy.
Does anyone else have an issue with it?
Yeah, so, and I understand what you're saying. I see this as a single source of the truth document. It's gonna be used only in that case where somebody is coming, and we've had maybe a dozen incidents of this. I think it's got the appropriate level of detail, and it, 2 pages, I think it's necessary to explain to the nth degree why. So I don't have a problem with the language because I think it's a seldom used document, and when it needs to be used, it's specific. So that's my opinion, but I also think it's important to have a single source of the truth document like this. So in general, absolutely, I would propose adopting this.
If anybody else, then that's 2. There's 3.
I guess I don't hear anybody else with an issue.
I don't have an issue.
Okay.
Okay,
Anything else?
that's all I have.
Okay. Eric?
That was it.
Okay.
Just said my piece.
Joy, should I give you a second?
Do we have an assessed list of what private infrastructure it's probably already been asked. Do that, it's on your computer.
We have some examples.
I know you have examples, but I mean, do we know in general what exists already that, okay.
We do.
So that was kind of my question.
Let's be at Mount Rushmore.
I love that picture.
Is that a private infrastructure?
No, that's public infrastructure.
That's public
Oh, I know it's infrastructure. It's a public park.
And then, is there, so from a policy perspective, not to have to turn private into public infrastructure, is our main method of approving private infrastructure within developer agreements?
Yeah, so I would say and Aaron and Dave, feel free to jump in, but the mechanics and our continued ability to accept private infrastructure is unchanged.
Correct, yeah,
This is-
I get that.
What this is because of the significance of the ask and the amount of money that's going in, it'll help the team, when Aaron gets a call, or I get a call, or Lynn, or Chad, instead of saying, well, the city typically hasn't done that, we can say, well, the council's talked about it, you're welcome to address them, but we have a policy that says we won't accept it, that's kind of defined, that says that, the reasons why we won't. It puts all of us in a better position to speak more, I would say confidently, because councils can change, and I'd say like the last time a request for private infrastructure came, it was a completely different city council. And so I think it's good, on this, and we're gonna look for other examples where instead of relying on past practice, we're gonna say, let's create a policy and then let's on a somewhat, a consistent basis check in to make sure that these are still the wishes. So this is kind of a reflection of that philosophy.
Okay, I get that. I just want to make sure that as a council, we have visibility to new private infrastructure that's being added to our community.
So what's the
To new
Yes.
private infrastructure that's being added to the community, and I'm wondering where I would look for that information. Is it in the developer agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
It'll typically be in the development agreement. It'll also many times be discussed in, for example, like Aaron's staff report. If there's going to be a private park that HOA wants to have their special private amenity, I think it would be noted because that's important for the council to know early on, because of course, if it's a public park, the city's gonna have to spend time and resources on keeping it up and doing things. So usually, unless you think otherwise, Aaron, I think that kind of a thing would be pointed out specifically in a staff report.
So like I would say like an upcoming, or even when you think about it tonight, for the site plan or concept plan for a hometown bank, there are elements of private roads within that development. The main road is, we're still calling Monroe Drive for addressing purposes, but you have to kind of go into the core of the development to get at some of those properties.
Okay, right. I just wanted it from an awareness perspective as we go forward, just so that we can cognizantly just be aware of that additional private infrastructure that's going in, because of course these requests come in the future, and just kind of understanding what might come.
Right. And Aaron brought up a good point, that private infrastructure, whether it's roads or utilities, is still reviewed by the Chief Trimbo or Chad as it relates to utilities. So it's not below like adequate standards, it just doesn't meet like city standards for width. And so that's where some of the cost savings come in related to density or just control of the section.
Okay.
And the city engineer too looks at it to make sure it can function appropriately and all that stuff. So.
All right. Okay, good. That was my only question.
I couldn't see you.
Yeah. Can we adopt this in 2023 though and not 2022?
We'll update the date.
Okay.
It was drafted in 22.
So yes.
So for me, the one thing that I noticed when we went through here, 1B is kind of the why. And I noticed like anecdotally.
1B is the what?
The why.
The why.
Of, the question that I get, and it's generally not first generation homeowners, if you will, not the folks who are living in the newly built homes. It's the folks who are the second or third or fourth who don't realize and potentially have been living in their homes for quite some time before the street starts failing. And you guys know we all know how much a mill and overlay costs, or even like a chip sealing costs. It's expensive investments. So oftentimes these conversations are heated and there's frustration. I would almost advocate for putting that why and making it just a little bit clearer, and maybe putting it right at the top of it, and almost like potentially templating it and saying, in Brookview, whatever that street is, XYZ lane, when the developers came through, was determined to be a private road because the developers wanted it to be. It's just kind of explaining a little bit more, like right at the top, that why, that explains in 2022, when Brookview went through the development process, it was determined at that point that this street would be private and that the HOA would be on the hook for all of the maintenance of that street. So I would just advocate for having that a little bit stronger and like literally the first paragraph that you read.
I understand the first paragraph. Can you say more about like listing specific projects? Because it would be typical.
It would be a template. So it would be
Template as far for what, like?
filling in like Dear Brent, you live in Spring Creek, so you have questions about your streetlights. When Spring Creek was plotted or went through the development process in 2001, it was determined that the lights would be private infrastructure. Just really detailing and getting specific. I don't know if we can do that with a policy and making it
Can
a
that be a cover
template.
letter?
Are you,
Yeah, that could
or
also.
maybe something
A
that
template for a
addendum to
cover
it.
letter.
Using the cover letter.
So I would prefer to see it in the policy and just right at the top.
The language in 1B, you mean? Or is this new, you're talking about new language?
Almost like bumping it up and having it be kind of an introductory paragraph before you get into one.
So would there be 10 different policies then if we have 10 different examples of public infrastructure?
No, it would be, and it doesn't have to be, so a template is, I think that would help explain it better. It could be more generic language of saying, private infrastructure is something that's determined when a project goes through the development process.
I
You know,
like
this
that. I like
policy-
beefing
I'm
it
not being very elegant, I'm
Well,
sorry.
I'm just thinking through, like, if someone were to call and I'm talking to them on the phone, I probably wouldn't just blindly send them this policy and say like, here, read this policy.
Right,
I think we would share some of that information and some of the history to say it was private because X, Y, Z.
okay.
And
I think just bumping it up a little bit though would help because when the person that you talk to on the phone is gonna share it with the neighbors on either side of them, right, that are experiencing the same issue, so it helps to clarify that too when it gets circulated.
Sure. Courtney, I like that, and moving it up higher as the explanation, and maybe beefing it up just a little to say, it started here, right? Like, it started at the time of development, like, this didn't happen later on. But I don't know that I think we should be calling out specific developments within the policy, but I do agree with the first part that we could beef that up and move it up a little bit.
And I agree that if you send this out in an email, you would say, Dear Brent, in result of the conversation that we had about the streetlights in Spring Creek, here's the policy on private infrastructure. So I'm not gonna die on the hill of templating this and personalizing it, but.
Well, we could,
I have a thought too for how we can move that up and make it a little more top of the document, so it's the first thing or second sentence they see, rather than kind of buried in under that list of bullet points. I think that makes sense.
Okay.
I would say, I don't know if this is getting it, but if, you know, if you or the rest of the council are communicating with the resident and you want us to draft a template for you to use to communicate to a resident, we can do that. Is that what you're kind of getting at?
No,
No.
no, the main thing I'm asking for is just to put that why of,
Here's what you're reading is.
here's why, well, this decision was made a long time ago. This is potentially new to you, that you're discovering that the street that you live on is private, but this has been forever since Spring Creek Drive has been in the city of Carver kind of thing.
And there will be situations inevitably where we don't know why the developer wanted private infrastructure.
Right.
Because they're old and maybe, you know, the development was before anyone that's still here, their time. So, but generally speaking, we're probably gonna know why,
Yeah, and
either by context or.
but that's not the why I'm referring to.
Right.
Like, we don't have to know why, right? Like, it's now a thing, and the HOA pays for the maintenance of any one of these 8 bullet issues or items. But just kind of explaining the catalyst, why the decision was made, because that's this question that I'm trying to solve for here, because folks are always like, well, why was it made
Yeah.
private?
I hear that, and I think there's some things that we could work on to make that happen. I would also offer and others can jump in on this, but for as much as like a policy can be like I look at this as more of like almost an internal policy. If like staff, if we do a good job with that resident, we'll reference the policy, but we'll use history that we know, or I might call Erin and say, can you talk to Christy? She's got a question about the River Bluffs HOA and what went into it that like for me, like, whenever I have to send somebody a copy of the ordinance, I look at that as a failure on my part, like, I didn't really do a good enough job explaining it, cause they wanna see it in black and white, cause you don't really, I didn't do a good enough job explaining to them the ins and outs, and so that copy of the ordinance is kinda like, well, if you don't believe in what I'm saying, here's a copy of the ordinance, and I look at this policy for infrastructure in that same way. If I don't explain it right, they're gonna say, well, I wanna see a copy of it, cause really it's just, the city doesn't have a practice of taking it, the council's adopted a policy, kinda, here's the Cliff Notes version, because in most cases, even though it's 2 pages, and Dave did a nice job of like simplifying it, you know, I would say like the average, like, I think of like, if I handed Erica the 2-page private infrastructure policy, she's not reading it, she's gonna ask me, give me the high notes, and I would say like, most residents are not gonna wanna read the policy, they're gonna want the staff that they're, you know, investing in to give them the high notes. So, doesn't mean we shouldn't make the tweaks, I don't look at this as like a document that we're gonna be handing out on a regular basis.
Yeah, I agree with that. In those conversations, right, folks aren't looking for the policy, they're looking for us to take over the costs involved in maintenance of these items. But I think since we're starting and we have the opportunity to just bump that up.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with
Yeah,
that.
but I agree, like, nobody's going to call and lead with, I would like your private infrastructure policy, please. No, that's all you can help me with, thank you, good day, you know, like, so point taken.
Yeah, I was just trying
Yeah,
to like emphasize that we wanna do a job as a staff team to like explain whether it's a policy or an ordinance, and not say like, here's a policy, figure it out for yourself.
read it and call me if you have any
Right.
questions, yeah, no, I understand that, that's why you guys are so great. Anything else?
Nope.
Okay. Let's see, moving on to the fire department public services building project.
So excited she has no private infrastructure.
Alright, so tonight I'm just going to be talking high level about a potential general obligation bonding scenario for a Series 2024 A bond, which, what is that exactly? What would the city be financing? So 2 weeks ago, Brent introduced the public services storage facility, which would be a 9,600 square foot new building addition, and a fire station turnout gear storage, which would be an 820 square foot addition to where the fire department bay is right there for their turnout gear, as well as some future maintenance, which would be like a roof, HVAC. Some of this stuff is a little bit unknown until we really get up there and look at what needs to be done. And then third, a salt storage facility. So proposed preliminary project schedule. So where we're at today is we're reviewing the financial impact for a potential project scope of what we know today. March 6th, City Council to consider scope and proceed with Wool to prepare design drawings. And then the fun begins with schematic design and development with city staff, and then council review of design and cost estimates. Community engagement is always really fun, and then construction drawings and formal council project and financing approvals. That's followed by bidding and award of bid, construction material lead time, and then the actual construction of the project.
Could I jump in?
Yeah.
So what, we had a late addition to the agenda, we got a revised proposal from Wool that got into all the elements that the council discussed. And again, just opening that up for conversation when Lynn gets done, but an opportunity to kind of, before making a final decision on any of these scopes, is to maybe do a little bit more work with the architects and staff to get an idea of what some of these elements look like for cost estimates that are a little bit more refined before making final decisions. So short story is, don't feel like you have to decide what the scopes are tonight or at your March 6th meeting, unless you feel like, yep, I'm all in on this, or nope, I don't even want to consider that, don't even spend the money to do the review. That's kind of the spectrum of choices.
All right, so preliminary project costs, we were very tried to overshoot here with the numbers. So for the public services new storage building, we estimated at 3 million. The percentage of that would be general fund is 50%. So the amount that we would need to bond for is 1.5 million. Going down to the fire station expansion, we're estimating that at 500,000, and that would be all paid for by taxpayers, so a general fund. And then the building maintenance, that is, I have a really detailed breakdown of who's all paying what, if anybody wants to see it after the meeting, but that comes out to 81% of general fund, and that's 887,000. So the total amount for this general fund obligation bond would be $2,887,500. So all of these numbers are rounded. We estimated them all, tried to be high with all of the numbers. The assumption for the bond is to also pay for some with water and sewer funds, and those amounts are listed down below. And that would be an annual amount. I talk about that a little bit later, but.
Just a little bit of insight on the building maintenance, so like the HVAC units and the roof, you know, we have a methodology for general fund, water and sewer, but because of our fire contracts, the maintenance of that building is included as a cost share between the townships that we provide services to, so that's why you see kind of a funky number in there. And then if you think about the self-storage facility, that wouldn't be a part of that, so that's why you see that 81%. It's not a kind of a rounded like 100 or 50 or 75%, so there's some complexities within a building, how that would be funded.
So for those who are a little more visual than this, you can see where the bond cost allocation would lie. 63% to the general fund, 30% to the water, and 7% to the sewer.
Is that when you combine all three of the
Yes.
items in scope? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then the fire department would obviously be responsible for their portion of the building expansion and the building maintenance, and which that comes from so that's coming from the green portion over there. And I just listed those out separately so you could see what those amounts are. Again, all estimates at this point.
And you're carving out the fire department here because we have the newer updated agreement with the townships around.
Yeah, so townships, they don't pay for new building construction. So with the expansion or the 500,000, part of the new service agreement says the city will be paying all of that, but they're still required building maintenance.
Okay.
And if you think of building maintenance, that's 50% of the existing building because half of it's public services, half of it's fire station. To just re-emphasize, because it's really significant, is these are very conservative cost estimates rounded at this moment in time. And so as you define that scope and you have more detail to what that project is, we're going to narrow in on a better number. But I would say like they're close to like worst case scenario because everything is like the roof is a complete re-roof and all the HVAC units have to go tomorrow. And we're also building in contingency for, you know, we're talking about these numbers today, but if you bid for these that's a year from now, so that's another, you know, handful of percent of increase. So we're building to that under promising, over delivering at this point in the exercise.
So the financing plan for the 2024A CIP bond, again, these are assumptions based on the information that we have today. We are using today's rates plus 0.75%, which gives us an average rate through the life of the 25-year bond of 4.4%. And that's based on our current credit rating of AA.
Did our credit rating change?
It hasn't for a handful of years. We used to be AA minus, and now we're AA.
Okay.
But it's been 6-7 years.
Wow.
So again, 25-year term. You know, if everything goes by schedule, the first interest-only payment would be due February of 2025. And averaging out the debt service payments out of the general fund would be $269,540 annually. And we would be levying the taxpayers for that bond repayment. So this is a scenario, it's a snapshot in time, and it doesn't take into consideration other budgetary actions the council may take in the future. So in 2024, if our levy increase, changes, tax capacity numbers change, etc. So increase in debt levy would be about $270,000 annually. Our current debt levy, you can see there for this 2023 was 1.3 million, and the increase would bring us up to 1.5, and that was actually about what it was in 2022. Just to remind you, because we did have some fall off this year. Potential tax impact on residents, and this is using the current year's tax capacity numbers and tax rates. The average valued home of $408,000 would see an increase of $124. And then I did give other examples for estimated market values for different valued homes and what they would see annually increase. Again, that's not considering any kind of tax capacity growth that the city might experience, and no levy increase or decrease for the city. So this is just using today's information. Again, water fund annual debt service would have a commitment of $54,000, and the sewer fund would have an annual debt service payment of $13,000. And those are both assumed to be generated by their revenues. So what do we have coming up in 24 besides, what else? The 2015 B bond will be paid off, which will free up about $101,000 annually in debt levy. A potential equipment certificate to purchase public service equipment. If you guys recall back to our CIP and what we needed, we shuffled a whole bunch of equipment around, and we're trying to plan for a big public service addition of equipment. So there's a potential for $500,000 to $1 million of public service equipment that hasn't been quite identified yet. Collective bargaining agreement renewal for 24-25. And we are adding an additional $100,000 for street maintenance, which will bring that levy to $420,000. And then there's been talks about the Southwest Service Area trunk utility extension. We've talked about that in this room, and that could be developer driven or council decision driven. But those are some ideas of what's coming up in 24, just to get your mind kind of focused on that. And I will take questions or go back to any slides that you guys are interested in, but that is a very high level of the 2024 bond to support those expansions on the public services and fire department.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Questions? With the water fund and the sewer fund, we're at the slide just before you. So are we looking at much of an increase that this is going to, that the taxpayers are going to see because of this project?
Are you talking about like rates?
Like rates.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's hard to take just this project without looking at the entirety of the project. So, we'll start looking at the long-term financial plan revision in probably the next month or two, do a kickoff.
Mm-hmm.
But really, on the whole, $54,000 is not going to move the needle on rates. But if you talk about, water tower painting and all the other things put together,
Mm-hmm.
there'll be somewhat of an impact, whether that's beyond what we would typically do at 3% or not. It would involve a significant calculation and review of all our services. We've had similar numbers in our plan though for many years. So I would anticipate there'd be significant, because we've been tracking this. It's just we've been adjusting the number every year based on what the conditions are. I don't know, Lynn, do you have any other insights?
Yeah, I was going to say that we've been planning for this in the long-term financial plan with the rates being adjusted, based on these additions. It's just the cost isn't quite as high as what we had expected. So when we do adjust the plan for this year, we'll see how the rates fall in. It probably wouldn't be in the next few years. Maybe it would be further down the line. So.
Okay, and then just to reiterate, when we were talking about this, for the EMV, I'll just say that. So for all of those, so this is looking at where we're at right now. This does not include any growth that's going to spread some of that out through the system.
Exactly.
Okay.
So if you think about what Lynn presented during the last budget, we had a record year of tax base. What we decided as a strategy is like, let's not attempt to try to like show that here today and then be wrong. It's like, let's show what we think is the worst number that you might see and then get the new tax. We'll run it. By the time we get to when we have designs from Callie and Chad, that'll align pretty closely with when we'll get new tax base numbers and we'll be able to run new numbers and hopefully we're in a position to say, we've got better news for you. But where we're at, we said, we're gonna keep what we know for now and then hopefully be pleasantly surprised with, because we had a great year for building permits 2 years ago, so we should see that new value coming on for 2024.
Okay. I'm just gonna piggyback on that. What I hear you saying is that hopefully these are the highest numbers that we will see because you've intended to give them some pad and delight us later on with numbers that hopefully go down when we have a more accurate.
Right, so the work that Lynn did here represents if you do this project and fund it out of this year's budget, essentially. But we know we're not doing that. We're funding it out of 2024, which means more tax base. But I would say that these numbers are the impact if you only added that project. So if Lynn's slide on, you're doing a capital equipment certificate, potentially you're adding street maintenance, you have, employee costs, insurance. You're not gonna do this project in a vacuum. There's gonna be other things at play. You could be in a position where you add all this and because of all the tax base, the tax is flat, or it could be a little bit more because you're investing in these other areas. What this does is this gives you a snapshot on this project at this time based on what we know, but we all know that story and the variables are gonna change. But what we're attempting to do is see what your comfort level is just with this and say like, well, I'm not even comfortable with this, or I am comfortable with this. That gives us an idea of how we want, or how you want us to move forward with this project.
Thank you. Eric?
Well, Lynn and Brent are also working with Credit Karma to bring us up to AA+. So that will change.
Okay, well,
Kidding.
well played.
No, my question was already addressed.
Okay.
So.
Lori?
I have a question on what budget does the old schematics design come out of, and do you pay it right away, or there's verbiage in there, but I just don't quite understand how they talk about like when they did invoice.
So we do have that budgeted in the CIP to
Okay.
be split between.
And you probably have said that before,
That's
so.
okay. No, but as
Yeah.
far as paying it, I'm not sure how that gets paid.
So what we'll do is have the council approve an interfund loan. So we'll borrow the money from another fund.
Okay.
And then we'll have proceeds when you move forward, or if you move forward with the project to pay that back. So it's a kind of a cash flow thing.
Okay.
And we had been budgeting 108,000. I think their number came in at like 76 to do all the phases. So they're trying to, I took that as a sign that they wanted to kind of work with us to kind of tighten up what our scope is and do that in a maybe a more affordable fashion. So
Do they bill that right away?
it's bill as you go. So
Okay.
it's not upfront. It's just they've reached a quarter of the way through it, so they're below 25%, and then at 50, 75, and 100.
Right.
But then when you get, there'll be another phase, and they kind of break that down where you get into construction drawings and like a site inspection that's a little bit more intense from a staff resource side of things. The great thing about Wold is they give you that flat fee right up front, and so it's a little bit easier to kind of budget and set expectations for budget with them.
And I could have looked this word up before, but in Wold's letter it also says the potential for photovoltaic. So solar
Those are
panels?
solar panels.
Okay, I was gonna look at you. Okay, well, that's exciting. That's potential.
Yep, so the way that we explain is we would like to, Chad and this team have done a lot of work on it, but through Wold and some of their resources, have them do an analysis and then put recommendations forth for those, the HVAC units, the rooftop HVAC units, the roof, and the salt storage facility. And then, we could be in a position where you're just kind of literally like go or no go on each of those phases based on, what you hear for the analysis and what the cost is. You can do a determination at that time.
That was it for my questions.
Joy?
No, I don't have any other questions. I'm good.
All right. Do you have what you need from us?
Well,
Yeah, so our intention is to bring forward the old proposal. Is there any information that you don't have now that you'd like to have for when that's presented at your March 6th meeting?
Not for me.
No.
I'm seeing lots of shaking heads. So I think we're done. All good?
Yep, thank you.
Yep.
thanks.
All right. Item number 4, permit escrows. Ms. Smith,
I was nervous for a second.
I thought we'd see a picture of you and your family around Rush Shore.
We haven't been like, but yeah, it's a long drive. Okay, so tonight we're discussing permit escrows. The city council previously has asked staff to explore the idea of holding X amount of dollars in an escrow for each building permit that we take in to fix things that come up post-construction typically. So the most, I think, frequent and easiest to understand is a sidewalk improvement. So Eric buys a house, builds it, is living there. Courtney's his new neighbor, her house is under construction. Suddenly there's heavy equipment going over Eric's sidewalk to get to Courtney's lot. Other way around. Heavy equipment going on Eric's, to get to Courtney's lot. Sidewalk gets damaged. The person who moved into their house 2 months ago calls the city and says, my sidewalk is cracked, it's in really bad shape. Who's going to come back and fix it? Whose responsibility is it? So the city has grappled and struggled a bit with builders to say, hey, you broke the sidewalk here, come back. Especially if it's one of the last houses in the development and they've walked away. Sidewalks are interesting because they're one of the first improvements to go in, so it goes in with a street, and it's something that gets damaged often because it's concrete, it's heavy equipment going over that concrete. So it's a process that I would say a lot of cities struggle with, and different cities approach it differently. There are some cities that say for every single building permit, we require that we hold $5,000 in an escrow until everything is done for your lot, all improvements. We met as a group to brainstorm that idea, see what it felt like for our team to do that, to hold $5,000 per lot. And we came up with what we think is a pretty good alternative. It felt a little tricky to hold $5,000 if we're doing a permit year where we have 160 new houses. Our building official worked in a community previously that does that process where they hold the escrow. And he said it was often tough to work through who you ask for the money, how you get it, how you track it, how the builder knows which lots they've gotten the money back for and which ones they haven't. So we worked through what we think is a good option, which was vetted by Lennar in the last development agreement that you saw in your packet, which was a good kind of gut check for us to say, this is our new proposed language, how does it feel for the other side of the table, the person who would be responsible. It was a little funny in the process, we had some proposed language, and Lennar came back and said like, yeah, we know this happens, but we're not interested in giving you escrow money to hold it. And it was just like, so you recognize that it happens, and this is a really hard process. So Dave, Aaron, and I worked really hard to figure out something that works for them, but also for us. So outside of holding a specific permit amount for each lot, we came up with an alternative where we added language to the development agreement. There's two sections in the DA attached to the packet that are highlighted. That's new language for our development agreement. And it essentially states that the city has the ability to hold letter of credit dollars until everything checks out to be fine. So previously we were doing letter of credit reductions that wouldn't consider some of these improvements. So it'll be on us to make sure that we are checking these things, so landscaping, sod, sidewalks. I'll also say we get those calls pretty often. It's new homeowners, I get it, like when you move in and suddenly you have a cracked sidewalk that you then have to repair. It's really tough for us to get a hold of a builder, and even if we called them and said, hey, we're gonna keep this $2,500 if you don't come fix that sidewalk, and they'd probably say, you got the short end of the stick, it's gonna cost more than $2,000, so have fun. So we feel like the approach that we have is appropriate for our city, but also appropriate for some of the damages that we've been seeing historically in new development. So Dave is available, Aaron, if you have questions or comments?
And if I could add one thing too, Aaron mentioned that some cities collect like a $5,000 escrow with building permits. Just in my experience, most of the cities that do that are the already very developed cities that aren't developing hundreds of lots a year potentially. So there's far less of an administrative burden on staff in those cities. That's not 100% the case, but the vast majority of cities that do that are those types of cities. And so they don't see these 200 lot Lennar developments. So just some food for thought. And the other thing too is we do have a minimum letter of credit amount that we're never going to release in any case until all the improvements are in, and that many times happens not for years after the development starts and they break ground. So I just wanted to add that because I think it's important for the council to know that as well going into this discussion.
What do you mean by limited letter agreement? Like a threshold of a dollar amount?
Yes, we will. I think the amount is we'll never. So we always reduce it commensurate with the amount of improvements that they still have to install. But no matter how far along they get, even when they get all the improvements in, we're going to keep $50,000 as a minimum, for example, until all of their obligations in the development agreement are adhered to. And one of the obligations now is that they have to, fix any damaged infrastructure during the development of the properties that are there. So there's going to be a little bit of money that we can kind of keep tucked away for that kind of situation.
So if I understand this correctly, this paragraph, I think highlighted something C, 19C.
The large paragraph.
The large paragraph, the second paragraph that was highlighted, really gives the flexibility to the city to say, is that remaining amount left enough? Or, right, we're not gonna ratchet it down quite to that $50,000, we're gonna keep it at 70 because we think that there's still some potential here. It may not be enough to cover what might need to be done.
Yeah, and that language, when it's paired with some language earlier on that says very clearly that you as a developer or whomever happens to buy the lots from you, you have to repair anything that you damage during construction of the
Yeah, so that those two things.
Those two things when read
You're
together.
supposed to fix it.
Yep.
But it's up to the discretion of the city to make sure that we are holding back enough, remaining security. Security is the word.
Yeah, and if we don't have enough, or if we make a decision that we may not have enough security, we can either require that they do it, or that's going to get tough because they push back really hard on some of this language. More importantly, we could say, well, then you're going to enter into an escrow agreement with us. You don't have to do it right away. We'll issue your CO so you can close. Lennar's big problem was, usually when they have a buyer, they've got a closing date scheduled and they really don't have time to send somebody out to fix a sidewalk before this buyer wants to get their CO and go move in. And I get that. That's the reality of how fast real estate transactions work sometimes. So we were a little bit flexible with them, but we also wanted to make sure that we had some language in here that was better than what it previously has been.
And so, I'm sorry, so would Lennar signed off on this language in the developer agreement?
Yes, there was some back and forth. We got them there. So I think, to Aaron's point, it was a good test. Gut check, I think this is the term she used, especially because Lennar is a national builder who does this in a lot of communities. And it was really funny when we put stronger language in it right away, and I didn't know if they were going to even catch it because you never know how closely they're reviewing these agreements. And I mean, that was literally their only comment in our DA was, we hate this language. This happens all the time, which I think made Aaron fall out of her chair laughing. But and we don't want it. Yeah. So yes, they're good with it.
Okay,
In fact, that was the final version.
It gives the city what we want, right? And then we've already tested it with the big national builder, so.
It would be nice to be able to withhold a CO, but practically, I mean, they pointed out the reality of it's really not something they can do, and we get that. I mean, we also don't want to be builder unfriendly. There's kind of a little bit of give and take with how we want to be perceived and how we want to work with our developers. So.
Makes sense to me.
I have a question then. So we're holding the security for 2 years post-construction. That seems like a long time.
construction is completed.
It's standard.
Fair, yeah, we just, well, I think there's a potential letter of credit being released tonight from which development?
Timber Creek.
No.
Yeah, Timber Creek grading, was it?
Okay, but no, I mean, there's been some securities that are released from projects that Larry oversaw when he was here, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, so.
Okay.
Which isn't uncommon, I mean, it takes time for the improvements to go in and then for the houses to get developed and purchased and, the ebbs and flows of the market, so.
And the whole time we're tracking the punch list so we know, kind of the amount of work that's hanging out there. I review all the letter of credit reductions, so we feel comfortable that we're covered before we release any of that security money, so. And we always hold 125% of what we think is remaining, so we have a contingency built into it, so.
And that covers us through a warranty period where they may have to bring heavy equipment back out.
Yep, and they also have to provide a 2-year warranty bond at the very end too, so we're kind of covered in multiple ways, so.
Okay. Any other questions?
No, I'm happy they can live with that.
Sounds good. Nothing from me. Do you need anything else from us?
We do not.
All right, we've already met Deputy Fisher. Joy, what you missed out is he does not speak Spanish. So,
Two truths and a lie.
Two truths and a
lie.
Oh.
He was a college wrestler, and he has 2 kids. Right?
Boys.
He's a wrestler.
Wrestler, 2 kids, got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now you're up to date.
Great.
City manager's report, right?
Yeah, a couple of things. Wanted to kind of plant a seed with the council. We've talked about it as a staff team about trying to reimagine how we do community comment. Kind of thinking of communication with residents as more of a destination, not, or more of a journey, not a destination. Like there's always going to be maybe constant room for improvement. And just my own observation is there's something about it's kind of appears to be formal, and in cases where people have questions, it seems like we may have or may not have the answer, but we always just get back to them at a later date. And I was talking with Joy a little bit about it this afternoon, and she had a great perspective of like, start with the why. What are we looking to accomplish? Why do they want to address the culture? You want to speak to that, Joy?
Yeah, so I was just thinking, why would somebody come to a council meeting, right? Versus, we have a lot of other ways to interact with the city staff, right, and council members, right? We make it really easy. You can report stuff online, you can call into the city staff, right? You can contact individuals. So why would somebody come to the council meeting, right? So from my perspective, it's to have an audience with all of us at one time, right? To be heard by the whole council, right? And possibly to be on record as well, because it is a public meeting and we do take video and all this kind of stuff. So those would be the reasons why, right? So I think, so my thought was maybe there's an impetus to help educate residents on how to interact with us and what may be the right way to do it, depending upon what you want to achieve, right? If you want a full audience, if you want to go on the record with something, come to a council meeting, right? You've got a time slot here, you've got a couple minutes, you can address the whole council and be heard. But if you have a question about something, or you want to know more about something else, or voice a concern, or a pothole, or whatever it is, right, here's your path.
So what I'm looking for is not necessarily prescriptive, where you say this is what we should do. But because I want this to be ongoing, but I am curious to understand what you like about what we do and what you don't like about what we do, so that we can, this might even evolve into a strategic planning topic where it's like, well, what's the best way to engage with residents, not just on this, but in other pieces. But I think it'd be helpful for not only me, but the rest of the team to kind of hear where you're at, so that we can maybe come back at some point after several pieces to kind of build a better mousetrap that other people look to us and say, oh, Carver kind of figured out a better way to communicate with residents. Because this feels like oftentimes if someone's going to take the time to come, it's usually not to say you're doing it, they've got something that they're maybe a little bit emotionally impacted by, and so can we lean into that? I mentioned this to the mayor right when we came in, but we have an elderly resident that called me like probably an hour before the work session started and was upset about the council's position on Prime airport service. But she doesn't want to drive in, she doesn't really know how to use Zoom. And so I just said, I'm gonna call you between 7 and 7:10 and I'll introduce you to the council and you can talk. Like, that would maybe be an example of like how we could do something differently. Again, like it's not in our nature as a staff to like say like, we have this problem, we don't have a complete like packaged answer for you, but I think it's okay to, you know, have some space to say like, well, what's on your mind, how do you want to be represented, etc. So if you want to share your thoughts, it'd be helpful for us to hear that.
Yeah, I don't mind starting. I think this is something that we've talked about that I struggle too with, like come at the beginning of the meeting and talk about whatever you want to talk about, except for the stuff that's on the agenda, but you may or may not have an opportunity to share your thoughts on the agenda. I'm a big fan of trying to figure out as many opportunities for folks to come and be heard. And I don't think we're doing poorly in this area. I think as it involves the meetings, there's a little bit of room for improvement. Kind of specifically in just the top of my head, 3 minutes seems really short to share comments. So I know that in the past, I have not really struck hard and fast to keeping folks to just 3 minutes. So I'm more comfortable with 5 minutes. That seems like a more fair amount of time. I think it's a good idea to have it at the top of the meetings, so that if folks just want to say their piece, whatever that is, they can say it and jet. I think that's it right now for my initial, but Joy, you look like you have something to say.
No, I completely agree with you to have it at the front of the meeting. I'm okay with a 5-minute time slot unless we have a situation where we, right, have a mass crowd we've got to get through, right? We might want to be a little bit more, we would have an exception in that case, but yeah, I don't think the time limit is a concern.
I think then we should say if we have that huge crowd that we say,
Yeah.
if it hasn't already been brought up, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah, then, you know.
And I think we've done a
Yeah.
good job of doing that in the past, yeah.
And I agree that it should be at the beginning of the meeting. I don't want people to sit through what could potentially be a couple-hour meeting to talk to us for 5 minutes.
And get
I mean,
more
yeah,
worked up,
a little more worked up. I also, it does seem a little bit cumbersome during that, when we have that comment time. One thing that I mentioned to Brent today too is that if people are taking the time to come in to speak to us, I feel, but I do feel like a little bit it appears that we're sort of just brushing. Okay, thanks for coming. All right, bye-bye now.
We gotta move on to the next.
Yeah, and I think if they're gonna come here, and we've kind of made in the past where we don't necessarily comment or ask questions during that time, I would almost advocate for a few less rules, and if there's something that we wanna ask them back, or that if we do wanna engage for a couple minutes, that we should do that. I mean, they came here to talk to us and to all of us, so I think we may not have all the answers, but I think if we have something that we would have additional questions, we want to engage for a few minutes, it's better than saying, okay, thanks for coming, we'll get back to you. Somebody will contact you from the city, like you took the time to come here. If I have a question, I want to take the time to ask it of you. So I would hope that we could loosen that up a little bit and not be quite so just stringent on saying, okay, we'll get back to you.
Yeah, I don't think there should be a requirement for us to engage,
Absolutely.
for sure. But yeah, if we have clarifying questions or something like that, that's fair. Lauren?
I like keeping it at the beginning of the meeting, and 5 minutes would, I think, go over well. I would like to not limit them to, or I'd like to let them talk about anything, even if it is on the agenda, because a lot of times they just don't understand how the meetings run. Even if, just, if they still want to voice their opinion, and maybe they just had bad timing and they should have showed up 2 weeks earlier. But I wouldn't want to not let somebody speak on something just because it's already on the agenda. Or, and
Yeah,
with the
I
exception,
don't-
maybe if there's a public hearing. And
Yeah, I think, and I think we have in the past kind of loosened up that, you know, if somebody's there, I kind of like bucketing it. Come and speak at the meeting, at the beginning of the meeting if it's not on the agenda, but then let's keep it so that it's in context. Because perhaps what you're concerned about, maybe you have a question, maybe it'll get answered during a staff report or something like that. So I think it makes more sense to keep that bucketed.
I still rather like in the beginning, because I myself wouldn't want to go to a meeting and like have something that I really like, oh, I want them to know how I feel about this, and I just didn't know the options and how to communicate it in the time frame. And then during the agenda item, I'm not allowed to give a comment because it's not for the public.
No, I'm saying that we
Yeah.
loosen that
Yeah.
requirement so that they can comment during
Oh,
the permit
okay.
escrows.
Okay,
budget
so if
items,
they
so that
come and
it's-
say, I want to speak about permit escrows,
So we would
God.
say something like, this is the community comment
Then-
portion, you have anything that's not on the agenda, this is your time.
then they would
If it is on the
stay.
agenda, we'll talk about it during that agenda item.
And would they be allowed to speak
And
up?
entertain questions. And
Would
then
they be allowed to speak up then?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, then I feel much, I like that idea.
Because I think
just didn't wanna
contextually,
rule it.
that's just, that would be
Yeah.
for a smoother meeting.
Okay, I like that. And then this I just thought of like, yeah, that's sometimes kind of awkward when they come here and then we're like, well, you don't have to stay. You know, I feel like I was like, it just doesn't feel as welcoming, but yet I wonder if we just even ask them, how do they prefer we communicate, and then just say if they want to leave their phone number or their email. Just
do you do that now? How do we, when we say, well,
sometimes Brent gets up and follows them out. But we can't. But we can't do that.
You.
We got the basketball
We have like
referee.
a check-in sheet
That,
at
yeah.
Watertown where people signed in and then
Oh.
they left their email and phone number.
And that would be too, would you like to be contacted?
I think we just take all these comments in and just let it marinate for a
Yeah.
little bit.
I don't think I have much else to add. I agree that it should be at the beginning. I agree that if there are people there, we explain the protocol, and when it's done, we give them an opportunity to leave without feeling bad about it. The time question, 5 minutes, can it be 5 minutes or at the discretion of council? Can you add that language?
I
Or
would
is that too
avoid, I would
problematic?
avoid that. I think there, so, not to get too into the weeds on the First Amendment stuff, but the public forum is what's known as a limited public forum under the First Amendment.
Understood.
And you should create rules that you're gonna enforce, because then if you want to enforce a rule, but you didn't for somebody else, so you let somebody talk for 8 minutes, but then you really wanna shut somebody up after 3 minutes or 5 minutes because they're ragging on somebody, which they have every right to do, you could potentially have violated their right to do what you've let other people do. So I think no matter what you choose for a time frame, it should be as strictly adhered to as possible. And when I say that, I mean, you know, if they've hit their 5 minutes, I think it's reasonable to say, you know, we're at 5 minutes. Could you wrap up your remarks or something polite about that? Because I think you get into what I don't want to do is create a rule where someone has discretion to either shut someone down altogether or let them continue. And as somebody who's sat in these public forums for numerous different bodies, I will say that I think Carver, and this is probably a testament to staff communicating with folks. I mean, it's really not a time where you see a lot of folks show up, and I think that's probably because they're getting their issues addressed through staff or through council members individually, which is a really good thing. Some cities don't even do this. They have taken public comment off their council meetings because it's turned into a total nightmare and a forum for the usual suspects to show up and just complain and do things. And luckily, that's not the case here. But there's no requirement that you have open forum. I do think it's good government to have it. I'm not suggesting you get rid of it, but at the same time, you want to be pretty careful about creating a set of rules and then doing your best to adhere to them, because you can run into issues if you don't.
I just thought I needed more than 5 minutes to petition to have my driveway turned over to the city for maintenance. Especially ahead of the storm.
Well,
They might send me and then you're in trouble.
as much as I look forward to that, look at the time. I also wanted to say, I think, and I told Brenda this when we spoke today, but I think it's smart that we're talking about this now. We know how it is when there's a hot button issue, and I'm probably jinxing myself, and maybe permit escrows are gonna result in 30 emails tomorrow morning, but, you know, I think it's a good idea to have this conversation and figure it out when we're not kind of dodging a lot of public comments.
Then just three quick things, kind of related to communication. I just want to give kudos to Brenda Good and Diane Schwalbe. They created a better kind of internal system for taking in snowplow related calls and feedback from residents that kind of helps it triage to Chad and Paul. And as you can imagine, depending upon when and who someone contacts, they can get different responses. And we kind of talked about that, and they came up with a system that works well for the drivers and well for our team here in City Hall to get that information. And so again, it's another example of that journey of making something maybe just a little bit better than before. Chad's working with some contractors on security options for not only Lions Park, but potentially our pedestrian underpasses, looking at cellular technology. And one of the big barriers to some of these locations is we don't have Wi-Fi or a hardline internet. And so getting camera systems to function in kind of these, I would say, no service zones for internet is a challenge. And so Chad's been working with some vendors on that. And then kind of our whole leadership team has been working on a lot of design options for the potential parking lot or striping at Broadway and Main. And so we're hoping to bring something to your March 6th work session as far as options and cost scenarios for you to review.
Thank you. If you guys are okay, we'll push council requests to the meeting.
Yep.
And with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Motion by Councilmember McLean, and a second by Councilmember Monk. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.